Hi, welcome to my show, Best of the Best. I'm Alicia B. Whitman, and for my Best of the Best show, I pick the 5 best artworks, or in my opinion, they're the 5 best artworks by our artists. And this is episode Michelangelo. So, super excited. I kind of geek out about Michelangelo. He's really, really cool. So let's get going. Starting with number 5, the Doni Tondo. Now, I just said I pick my 5 favorite, the 5 that I think are best. Though I have to fess up to you on this one. I had never even heard of this one before I started doing some research into this show. But art historians convinced me that this should be on my top 5 list. I'll give you my reasons, and you see if you agree with me and them. Why is it so significant? Well, for one, because Michelangelo was a sculptor, not a painter. At least in his opinion. Clearly he could paint. But he considered himself to be a sculptor primarily. So we don't have very many paintings by Michelangelo. In fact, this may be the only painting that is not an entire ceiling or wall that exists today, created by Michelangelo, which is pretty cool. It makes it kind of important. The painting was commissioned by a wealthy friend of the artist. Imagine being so rich you're like, hey, Michelangelo, because you're Italian and you say it Michelangelo instead of Michelangelo like us Americans do. So like, hey, Michelangelo, mind painting me a small tondo for my bedroom wall? And he's like, yeah, sure. That would be cool. But the second, and in my opinion, real reason this one is so important is because it ushered in a new kind of art called mannerism. This was a whole art movement. So whenever somebody is father of a whole movement, it's kind of a big deal. Mannerism is not what you'd think it is. It's not about etiquette and, wiping the corners of your mouth with your napkin instead of on your brother. Mannerism was the next style of art that featured bright, almost garishly bright colors and really unnaturally twisted figures, which is kind of a weird thing to be known for. But look at La Virgen Maria. Look at how she is turned uncomfortably backwards to look at the Christ child. Now, in real life, would she have done that? No, she would have just turned around. But what would have happened? Her back would have been to the audience, which does not make for as nice of a painting. So she twists and gets a terrible neck ache, but shows off her incredible biceps, and most importantly, draws our eyes to the Christ child. And the tondo is yet another example of how Michelangelo did not take kindly to insults or perceived insults to his work. So he finished his tondo, covered it up, and sent it to his friend Doni, asked for 70 ducats. I assume that's how you say it, ducats, 70 ducats for payment. And Doni was a very frugal man, although quite rich, and he thought it was really only worth 40. So he sent 40 back in payment, and Michelangelo was outraged. It was totally offended that he was only going to be paid 40 for it. So he sent back a letter saying, no, you now pay me 100 or send back the painting. And Doni was like, I really like the painting, don't want to send it back. Okay, I'll agree to your original amount of 70 ducats. But, Michelangelo wasn't really in a negotiating mood. And he was like, no, you kind of irritated me, so now it's 140 or the painting back. Which Doni paid twice the original amount. But he paid it because he loved the painting and probably because he realized negotiations were not going to get any better. So, word to the wise, you don't insult the artist. Number 4, Moses. I would have picked this guy for his beard alone. Look at how it swirls around, and then remind yourself that it's made out of hard, cold stone. He didn't make little snakes out of Play-Doh and squish them on. He hammered this out of a solid piece of stone. And almost miraculously in the end, it looks so lifelike. It's like Medusa just froze him solid as the wind blew through his beard. It's amazing, so lifelike, although not quite lifelike because it's larger than life. Seated, the Moses is 8 feet tall. So I don't know, what would he be standing up, like 12 or something? It's incredible, it's intimidating, it's powerful, it's energetic, it's exciting. And think just how much more impressive it would be to see this in person than just in a picture. That size makes a huge difference. And for 1 second, compare this quickly to Donatello's Moses, which was done in the early Renaissance, about 100 years earlier. Which has more power or energy? Which one looks more alive? Which one looks like he's breathing? Which one's more exciting? Which one looks like he's quiet stone, and which one looks like he is about to jump up and throw those tablets down? It is just awesome. Number 3, the David. Now, if there hadn't been the David, there never would have been the Moses or the Sistine Chapel or anything else. The David is what made Michelangelo into a rock star. See what I did there? Because it's made of rocks. Or rock, solid rock, one solid rock. In fact, it was carved out of a very flawed 18-foot piece of marble that a number of other artists had refused to work with because it was flawed and they were certain they couldn't create anything nice out of it. But Michelangelo did, although not everyone agreed. In fact, when the David was brought from the artist's studio to the place it was going to rest, people were so shocked by it and so upset by it that they threw rocks at it, again with the rocks. Now, fascinating fact about the David. If you looked at him eye to eye, you would notice that his head is disproportionately too big for his body. And if you were with me for my Da Vinci video where we did proportions, you know that that's a big no-no. His head shouldn't be gigantic. Did Michelangelo mess up? No. See, the David was originally intended to be on a high pedestal or possibly even on the roof of a cathedral. And so he intentionally made the head big, because when you're looking at something that's high up, what happens to that thing that's at the highest point? It looks smallest because it's farthest from your eye. So if his head was the normal size, like yours and mine, it would look like David had a tiny pin of a head. So Michelangelo intentionally made it out of proportion, made that head too big, so that when we looked up to the David, it would look right, which is so cool to me. See, I kind of geek out about this sort of stuff. But a lot of students will ask me, why do you need to know the rules of art if so many artists just break them? And this is why. This is why. Because when you know the rules, you can know when to break them. And you can purposely break them to serve your purpose, like Michelangelo did here. It is such a cool example of this. He intentionally made it too big so that to us, it would look just right. Now, number 2, the Sistine Chapel. This is probably the most famous work of art that an artist never ever wanted to create. Now, even if the painting itself hadn't been so masterfully done, it probably would have made the list just out of its sheer size and difficulty in being painted. This is a ceiling, remember? A ceiling. It's above your head and way above your head. He had to build scaffolding to stand on. Now, let me set the record straight here, because this is a serious pet peeve of mine. Michelangelo did not paint the Sistine Chapel lying on his back. There was a movie in the 70s that showed an actor who was playing Michelangelo painting it lying on his back. And that may be the reason that most people think it is today. There are Pinterest ideas after Pinterest ideas of having your kids lay on their back and paint the ceiling. But Michelangelo did not do that. I've set the story straight. Michelangelo painted it standing up. It was terribly painful. One book I read said that the overuse of those neck muscles from looking upwards, from straining like that for so long, that those overuse of those muscles made them develop so that they were huge, so that Michelangelo ended up looking kind of like a bullfrog from those massive neck muscles. And I kind of believe it. Try and do this for just like a few minutes and with your arm above your head. That would be awfully uncomfortable. And he did that for 4 years. And yet he stuck with it, refusing help from the unworthy because they couldn't paint as well as he could. Although he did have help. That's another point where the internet has it wrong. He didn't fire all his assistants. He let them like mix his paints for him and do little things. But he often did not let them paint the important figures because they just couldn't do it as well as him. And you know, this is probably true. So he painted for 4 years looking straight up, causing great strain on his neck and his back. But he refused to cut corners. He did actually paint corners though, but we'll get to that in a second. He refused to compromise his work despite the constant nagging of the Pope, who was so frustrated at how long it was taking Michelangelo to paint the ceiling. In fact, at one point, the Pope, who kind of had a temper problem, kind of like the artist, got so mad that he slapped Michelangelo, who then stormed out. Remember, he didn't like to be insulted. And the Pope, who never said sorry to anybody, sent a letter apologizing to Michelangelo and begging him to come back and finish the ceiling. Though it was a tiny bit Michelangelo's fault too. Sure, he didn't want to paint the ceiling, and sure, he was totally forced to anyway. But the Pope originally had a very simple design, these geometric shapes, and it wouldn't have been that hard. But Michelangelo refused to go with that design, created his own, which included over 300 unique figures in unique positions with unique facial expressions. You know, he made it a little harder on himself, but it was for art. Oh, and to get back to that thing I said about corners, he actually, if you look at the ceiling, there are lots of architectural elements, like cornices, ribs, and niches or something. Sorry, I don't have a huge architecture background, but really cool elements of design, and they're fake. He painted them on there. Those weren't part of the ceiling. Sometimes he painted them on there to hide awkward parts of the ceiling, sometimes to help frame his design. But from this floor, you think they're actually there, which is just another testament to how cool it was. And now we're down to number 1. Sorry, number 2 was kind of long. But number 1, La Pieta. It's worth waiting for. I've seen this one in person, and it is unbelievable. I have to agree with Vasari, who wrote, "It is a miracle that a rock, which before was without form, can take on such perfection that even nature sometimes struggles to create it in the flesh." Seriously though, how often do you see real people look as perfect as this piece of rock does? This marble looks so soft that you just want to reach out and touch it to see if it's made of fabric, but you can't because it's behind protective barriers, because some crazy people have tried to destroy it. No, seriously, a disgruntled Hungarian took a hammer to it in 1972. La Pieta can be seen today, just gorgeous, but behind her protective barrier. So there you go, there's my top 5, best of the best Michelangelo. What do you think? Do you agree with me? Would you have included something different? I'd love to hear. And if you liked what you saw, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any others. And go ahead and check out my best of the best Leonardo. Or if you'd like to do art projects in the style of our artist Michelangelo, please join me for my 3 art videos where I'll give you ideas of how you can learn to be a little bit more like the master. There are also supplemental materials on my blog, and the address will be included in the comments. So thank you so much for joining us. Hope to see you again. And in the meantime, keep being creative.